Don't open that thing. Marion Cole's voice cracked through the radio static. Ethan Ward froze inside the abandoned ranger station, one hand on the rusted green cabinet, Atlas standing stiff beside him. The old German shepherd wasn't barking. That was worse. He was staring at the cabinet like something inside was still breathing. Atlas, back up, Ethan whispered. The dog didn't move. Then Ethan saw the words carved into the metal. For the one who stays. His fingers tightened around the lock. He had bought this place for $20. He was about to learn why no one else wanted it. He was 42 years old when he bought the ranger station for $20. Not 20,000, not 200, 20. One folded bill, soft at the corners. The last money Ethan Ward had carried in his wallet through 3 months of sleeping in his truck, washing up in gas station restrooms, and telling strangers he was between places because saying homeless felt too final, too sharp, like a door closing behind him. Beside him in the passenger seat sat Atlas, an 8-year-old German shepherd with a silvering muzzle, dark watchful eyes, and the quiet dignity of an old pastor who had heard every confession and kept them all. Atlas did not belong to Ethan at first. Maybe no one ever truly belonged to anyone. But the dog had chosen him in the patient, wordless way dogs do, by staying close when everyone else gave a man space. The county clerk slid the papers across the counter with a look that was not unkind, only careful. Pine Hollow Ranger Station abandoned since 2017. Structure unsafe, no utilities, no winter access, no guarantee of habitability. Sold as is. Ethan read every line, though the words blurred a little near the end. His hands were clean but rough, the knuckles split from odd jobs, the nails trimmed short the way the army had taught him long ago. He had once been a medic, the kind of man people called for when something had gone wrong and no one knew what to do next. Now he was the man no one called. That was the part he never said out loud. "You understand what you're buying?" the clerk asked. Her nameplate read Marion Cole. She was probably in her late 50s, with soft gray hair pinned at the back, and eyes that seemed to weigh people gently instead of judging them. Ethan looked down at Atlas. The dog's ears lifted, not fully, just enough to say he was listening too. "A roof," Ethan said. Marion's mouth tightened, not in disapproval, but in the way people look when they want to warn you, and know the warning may be all you can afford. "It's 11 miles from the nearest paved road. Trail only after the washout. The stove may not draw. The roof leaks over the west room. The old well was capped years ago. If the snow comes early, you won't get a truck within 5 miles of it." Ethan nodded. Outside the courthouse window, late October light lay thin and tired across the parking lot. His pickup sat crooked between 2 faded lines, rust over the rear wheel, 1 tire patched twice, everything he owned tucked behind the seat, a bedroll, 2 shirts, a dented coffee pot, a toolbox, a bag of dog food, and an old topographic map of Idaho folded along lines his father had made before Ethan was born. "Does it still stand?" he asked. Marion paused. "Last inspection said yes. Then it's more than I've got now." She looked at him a moment longer. People had looked at Ethan many ways since he came home from the service. With gratitude, with discomfort, with polite curiosity. With the quick glance people gave a man sleeping in a truck when they were not sure whether to pity him or avoid him. Marion's look was different. It held him in place without making him feel small. "The last ranger who lived there was Walter Boone," she said, reaching into a lower drawer. "Strange old bird, quiet kind when he wanted to be. Drew maps nobody asked for and fixed trail signs nobody paid him to fix. He used to say Pine Hollow didn't need an owner. It needed someone who knew how to listen." She handed Ethan a yellowed envelope tied with string. "These were left in the file. Trail notes, mostly. You'll need them more than the deed." Ethan took the envelope with both hands. The paper smelled faintly of dust, cedar, and thyme. Atlas rose from his sit and pressed his shoulder against Ethan's leg. It was a small pressure, but Ethan felt it all the way through him. 2 days later, they reached the end of the broken forest road just before dusk. The truck could go no farther. Beyond the washed-out bridge, the trail narrowed into dark timber and wet stone, climbing toward a place almost no one remembered. Ethan stood beside the open tailgate, wind moving through his jacket, and looked at the mountain as if it might look back. Atlas waited at the trailhead, steady as a promise. "Well," Ethan said softly, lifting the pack onto his shoulders, "let's go see what $20 bought us." They walked until the last light drained out of the pines. They walked through cold mud, under branches glazed with early frost, past creek beds whispering under stone. By the time the ranger station appeared, Ethan almost missed it. A low shape tucked between the trees, a sagging porch, a roof bowed under years of snow. A sign so weathered the words, Pine Hollow, looked less painted than remembered. The place should have looked dead. Instead, in the dim blue hour, it looked like something waiting. Ethan pushed the door open. The hinges complained softly. Dust breathed out. The cabin smelled of old wood, cold ash, mouse-chewed paper, and rain that had found its way in and never quite left. Atlas entered first. He moved slowly, nose low, paws silent, circling the main room as if reading a story written on the floorboards. Then he stopped near the back wall. Ethan set down his pack, rubbed a hand over his face, and noticed it only because Atlas would not move. Half hidden under a brittle canvas tarp stood a green metal cabinet, waist-high, scarred, locked, and oddly clean compared to everything around it. Atlas sat before it, his tail still, his gaze fixed not on the cabinet, but on Ethan, as if he had not found an object, as if he had found a question. Ethan let out a tired breath. Not tonight, boy. Atlas did not look away. Outside, the wind moved through Pine Hollow like a voice coming back after years of silence. Before Pine Hollow, before the $20 deed, before Atlas sat like a silent judge in front of a locked green cabinet, Ethan Ward had spent years perfecting the art of disappearing while still being visible. He was good at showing up on time, good at lifting heavy things, good at saying yes, Mom, and no problem, and I've got it in a voice steady enough to make people believe him. He could fix a leaking pipe with a borrowed wrench, change a tire in freezing rain, stack lumber until his shoulders burned, and carry groceries up 3 flights of stairs for an old neighbor who always tried to tip him with banana bread. What he could not do was stay. Not at the warehouse job outside Boise, where the fluorescent lights hummed all day, and the loading docks slammed shut with a sound that made his hands go cold. Not at the delivery company, where every route felt too crowded, and every apartment hallway smelled like someone else's life. Not at the little repair shop near Nampa, where the owner liked him well enough, but finally pulled him aside after Ethan missed 3 mornings in 1 month, and said gently, "You're a good man, Ethan, but I need someone who can be here." Ethan had nodded because the man was right. That was the hardest part. Nobody had to be cruel to hurt you. Sometimes life just kept asking for a version of you that no longer existed. Years earlier, Ethan had been a medic in the U.S. Army, the kind of man trained to move toward panic with calm hands and a clear voice. He had learned how to count breaths, red faces, find a pulse under mud, noise, fear, and confusion. He had learned that people did not always remember what you said when they were afraid, but they remembered the tone of your voice. So he made his voice a place to stand. Look at me, breathe with me. You're not alone. He had said those words so many times they became part of him. Then he came home and discovered there was no one standing in front of him saying them back. The country thanked him in small ways. A firm handshake, a free coffee, a baseball cap from a veteran's fundraiser. He appreciated all of it, and knew none of it could reach the room inside him, where the lights had gone out. His father had died while Ethan was still serving, a heart attack on a Tuesday morning while repairing a county snowplow. His mother followed 4 years later, not suddenly but slowly, losing pieces of herself to illness until her voice became a whisper and her house became a museum of things Ethan could not bear to touch. After the funeral, he sold what he had to sell, kept the old Idaho map from his father's desk, and told himself he was starting over. But starting over, he learned, was not one brave decision. It was 1,000 small humiliations, filling out forms, explaining gaps in employment, smiling when people asked if he had settled back in, pretending a rented room was home because it had a bed and a door that locked. Then even that room was gone when the owner sold the house, and Ethan packed quietly in the rain, leaving the key on the kitchen counter beside a note that said, "Thank you." Atlas came into his life the following spring, though Ethan would later think of it differently. He would say Atlas found him. The Shepherd had belonged to a veterans support program that was closing after losing its funding. He was 8, too old for most adopters, with stiff hips on cold mornings, and a habit of watching people as if he were listening beneath their words. The program director, Nora Bell, brought him out on a blue leash and said, "He doesn't need much, just someone patient." Ethan almost laughed at that. Patient was what people called you when they did not know you were tired. I'm living out of my truck, he told her. Nora looked at the truck, then at Ethan, then at the dog who had already crossed the room and rested his head against Ethan's knee. Maybe he isn't looking for a house, she said. Maybe he's looking for his person. Ethan stood there a long time with one hand hovering above Atlas's head, afraid to touch him because touch had a way of making promises. But Atlas waited, no pity, just presence. Finally, Ethan lowered his hand into the thick fur between the dog's ears, and something in his chest, something rusted and shut, moved a fraction of an inch. From then on, there were two shadows in the truck instead of one, two breaths in the dark, two lives folded into the cab beneath an old wool blanket while the Idaho nights turned cold around them. Ethan still did not know where he was going, but for the first time in years, when he woke before dawn with his heart racing and the world feeling far away, Atlas was there, steady and warm, reminding him without words that being lost was not the same as being gone. Ethan did not begin dreaming of the mountains because they were beautiful. Beauty was too simple a word for what they had been to him. The mountains were order. They were lines and elevations, ridges and drainages, creeks that knew where they were going, even when people did not. His father, Russell Ward, had worked for the highway department in central Idaho for 31 years, repairing washed-out roads, clearing rockfall, and driving snowplows through storms that turned the world white and nameless. He came home smelling of diesel pine sap, wet canvas and cold air, and he carried maps the way other men carried newspapers. They were always folded in the glove box, tucked beside the coffee maker, spread across the kitchen table under a chipped mug. Ethan learned early that a map was not just a picture of land. It was a promise that somewhere, even the wildest place had shape. Russell would trace a finger over the contour lines and say, "See how close these are? That means steep. See how they open here? That's a meadow. Water will gather there." Ethan listened the way some people listen to hymns, not because he understood every word at first, but because the sound of his father explaining the world made the world feel less likely to come apart. Years later, after the army, after the funerals, after the rented room and the truck and the quiet shame of counting coins under a dashboard light, Ethan still had one of those old maps. Sawtooth country, creases worn pale, corners soft as cloth. His father had marked certain places in pencil: Good Spring Water, Old Fire Road, Elk Crossing, Bad Bridge, watch the weather here. Ethan kept the map folded in a plastic sleeve behind the driver's seat, though he rarely took it out. Some memories did not hurt because they were sharp. They hurt because they were gentle. On sleepless nights, when Atlas breathed steadily beside him and the parking lot lamps buzzed overhead, Ethan would unfold it across the steering wheel and study the empty green spaces. Forest land, wilderness, old ranger districts swallowed back by timber, places where a man could walk for miles without explaining himself. He did not want to vanish in any dark sense. He wanted to be somewhere quiet enough that the noise inside him might finally lower its voice. There was a difference. One night in late October, rain tapping softly on the truck roof, Ethan sat outside the Boise Public Library with a paper cup of coffee gone cold in his hand. The library had closed an hour earlier, but its Wi-Fi still reached the parking lot if he parked near the east wall. Atlas lay curled on the passenger seat, muzzle on his paws, one amber eye open. Ethan had been searching job listings, though every listing seemed to require something he had misplaced. Recent references, steady history, a clean beginning. His thumb hovered over the screen, tired of scrolling past doors that looked open until he reached them. Then a county surplus page loaded slowly, line by line. Most of it was useless to him. Filing cabinets, road signs, a broken generator, a lot of office chairs. Then he saw it, Pine Hollow Ranger Station. Minimum bid, $20. Remote access only. No utilities, unsafe structure. Sold as is. Ethan stared at the words until the rain on the windshield became little rivers of reflected light. Pine Hollow. The name felt familiar, though he could not place it. He reached behind the seat for his father's map and unfolded it carefully over his lap. Atlas lifted his head. Ethan ran a finger along the faded print, past creeks and ridgelines, past old service roads, until he found a tiny square marked in pencil. PH Station? The question mark was his father's. Ethan sat very still. The truck smelled of damp wool, dog fur, cold coffee, and the faint metallic scent of worn-out heat blowing from the vents. Outside, cars passed without slowing, each one carrying someone toward a lit window. A dinner table, a reason to hurry home. Ethan looked at the little square on the map. He thought of his father's hands, cracked from cold. He thought of all the years he had spent trying to become useful enough to deserve a place in the world. Atlas shifted, then laid his chin on Ethan's knee, heavy and warm. Ethan whispered, not quite to the dog, not quite to himself. "What do you think?" Atlas gave a slow breath through his nose and did not move away. That was the thing about Atlas, he never answered. He simply stayed long enough for Ethan to hear the answer already forming inside him. By morning, Ethan had placed the only bid. By noon, no one had bid against him. By Friday, Pine Hollow was his, though ownership felt like too large a word for a man with $20 less than nothing. Still, as he folded the map and tucked it back into its sleeve, Ethan felt something he had not felt in years. Not happiness exactly. Not hope, not yet. More like the first thin crack in a frozen river when spring is still weeks away, but the ice has begun, secretly, to remember water. The county building in Clearwater County was the kind of place that smelled faintly of floor wax, old paper, and coffee that had been sitting too long on a burner. Ethan arrived just after 9 with Atlas beside him, his leash looped twice around Ethan's wrist, not because the dog needed holding, but because Ethan did. The hallway was lined with framed photographs of bridges, snowplows, timber crews, and men in hard hats smiling beside machines that looked too tired to be celebrated. Ethan stood under the fluorescent lights in his cleanest shirt, a gray button-down he had washed in a laundromat sink and dried overnight across the steering wheel. His boots were brushed, his face was shaved. Still, he felt the invisible dust of the parking lots and gas stations clinging to him. People could not see the months he had slept sitting up, but he carried them in the careful way he moved, as if trying not to take up more room than he deserved. Marion Cole called his name from behind the counter. "Mr. Ward?" Ethan stepped forward. Atlas came with him, calm and close, his ears relaxed but his eyes alert. Marion had the deed packet ready, along with a stack of disclosures thick enough to make $20 feel like a dangerous investment. She turned each page toward him and explained the warnings one by one. No certified road access, no active well, no septic record after 2016, roof damage reported, wildlife activity possible, winter isolation probable, limited emergency response. Ethan listened without interrupting. He had learned a long time ago that people often mistook silence for stubbornness, when sometimes it was only respect. Marion finally removed her glasses and looked at him directly. "I need to ask you something plainly. All right, are you buying this because you want it, or because it's the only thing you can afford?" The question should have embarrassed him. A year ago, maybe it would have. But there are places below pride where the truth begins to feel almost clean. Ethan rested one hand on Atlas's head. "Both," he said. Marion nodded slowly, and something in her face softened, not with pity, but with recognition. "That's an honest answer." She opened the yellowed envelope again and slid out a folded trail map, several handwritten notes, and one black and white photograph. The picture showed a lean older man standing on the porch of Pine Hollow Ranger Station, one hand raised against the sun, his hat tilted back, a tired smile barely touching his mouth. Behind him, the station looked younger, straighter, its windows bright in the mountain light. "Walter Boone," Marion said, "last permanent ranger assigned out there. Stayed after the district consolidated. Some say too long, some say not long enough." Ethan studied the photograph. Walter had the look of a man who had made peace with being misunderstood. What happened to him? Moved to Salmon for medical care. Passed in 2018. No close family that anyone could find. The station sat after that. Budgets changed. Roads washed out. People forgot. She tapped the photo gently. But Walter didn't forget people. Hikers, survey crews, lost hunters, seasonal workers, anyone caught in weather. He kept coffee on the stove and dry socks by the fire. No sermons, no questions. He said a man's worst day shouldn't have to introduce itself before being helped. Ethan looked up at that. Something behind his ribs tightened, then gave. He thought of every counter where he had counted change under someone's impatient stare. Every morning he had folded himself smaller inside his truck, so no one would notice he had slept there. Every time kindness had come with paperwork, suspicion, or a lecture about better choices. Atlas leaned his weight against Ethan's leg, grounding him. Marion slid a pen across the counter. You should also know the county board wanted this place gone from the books. Most folks saw liability. Walter saw shelter. Maybe you can decide what it becomes next. Ethan signed his name. The letters looked strange on the page, as if they belonged to a man with a steadier hand and a permanent address. Marian stamped the deed, tore off a receipt, and held it out. Pine Hollow is yours, Mr. Ward, yours. The word landed quietly, not like thunder, more like a match struck in a dark room. Ethan folded the receipt and put it in his wallet where the $20 bill had been. Empty space replaced money, but for the first time in a long while, empty did not feel like nothing. Outside, the morning had warmed just enough to loosen the frost from the courthouse steps. Atlas paused at the top and looked toward the north, where the mountains sat blue and distant beyond the town rooftops. Ethan followed his gaze. "We may be fools," he said. Atlas gave one slow wag of his tail, dignified and unconcerned. Ethan smiled despite himself, small and rusty but real. Then he opened the truck door for the dog, tucked Walter Boone's envelope under his jacket like something fragile, and drove toward the road that would take them as far as roads were willing to go. The road gave up before Ethan did. It ended at a washed-out bridge where spring floods had eaten the middle clean away, and left two broken edges of asphalt staring at each other across a narrow, fast-moving creek. Beyond it, the old service trail climbed into the timber, thin and dark, more memory than road now. Ethan parked the truck under a stand of lodgepole pines, killed the engine, and sat for a moment with both hands resting on the wheel. The sudden silence felt enormous. No traffic, no voices. No refrigerator hum from a rented room. No distant argument through thin apartment walls. Just water moving over stone, wind passing through needles, and Atlas breathing beside him with the steady patience of someone who had already accepted the journey. Ethan looked at the cracked dashboard, the empty passenger footwell, the small pile of belongings behind the seat. Everything he owned could be carried badly in one trip or carefully in two, and he had no desire to come back before he knew whether Pine Hollow was real. He packed slowly: bedroll, coffee pot, wool blanket, first aid kit, hand tools, 2 cans of beans, oatmeal, a bag of dog food, water filter, matches sealed in plastic, Walter Boone's envelope, and his father's old map. The pack sat heavy when he lifted it, dragging at his shoulders like an old accusation. Atlas jumped down from the truck with a soft grunt, sniffed the wet air, then looked up the trail. 11 miles, Ethan said. "You still voting yes?" Atlas stepped forward and waited at the first bend. That was answer enough. The first mile was easy in the way beginnings often lie. The trail followed the creek through low brush and yellowing grass, with pale sunlight slipping through the clouds in narrow pieces. Ethan's boots found rhythm. His breath settled. Atlas moved ahead, then back, then ahead again, never wandering far, his dark coat flashing between trunks like a thought Ethan was trying to hold. By the 3rd mile, the climb began. The trail steepened and narrowed, cut along a slope where loose stones shifted underfoot. Ethan felt the old ache in his knees, the deeper pull in his back, the quiet complaint of a body that had been asked too many times to keep going without being thanked. He stopped near a fallen cedar and drank from his canteen. Atlas stood beside him, ears lifted toward something Ethan could not hear. "Don't start hearing things I can't handle," Ethan murmured. The dog glanced at him, almost offended, then returned to watching the trees. By noon the sky had lowered. The air smelled of cold iron and wet leaves. A soft sleet began to fall. Not hard enough to be dramatic, just steady enough to make every branch shine and every rock untrustworthy. Ethan pulled his collar up and kept moving. Twice Atlas stopped before Ethan reached a bad place, once at a section where mud had swallowed the trail's edge, and once at a rotted footbridge hidden under brown pine needles. The dog placed one paw on the wood, withdrew it, and looked back. Ethan tested it with his boot. The plank gave a tired crack. "Good catch," he said softly. Atlas accepted the praise without vanity, as if keeping Ethan alive was simply part of the weather. The farther they went, the more the world behind them seemed to close. Town became an idea. The county office became a story. Even the truck, waiting below with its rust and worn seats and last proof of ordinary life, felt like something owned by another man. Ethan's thoughts thinned with the trail. Step, breath, stone, root, sleet, dog, map. By the 9th mile, fog moved between the pines in slow gray folds. Ethan's shoulders burned. His fingers had gone stiff around the straps. He began to wonder whether Marian had been kind enough to warn him, and he had been proud enough not to listen. Then Atlas stopped, not suddenly, reverently. He stood at the top of a small rise, tail low, head lifted. Ethan came up beside him and saw it through the trees. Pine Hollow Ranger Station sat in a shallow clearing under a bruised October sky, smaller than he had imagined. Rougher, too, the porch sagged at one corner. Moss darkened the roof. One shutter hung crooked, tapping faintly in the wind. The sign above the steps had faded until the words looked less painted than whispered. And yet the place stood. After weather, neglect, silence, and 7 empty years it stood. Ethan did not move for a long moment. Something inside him had prepared for disappointment, maybe even relief. If the station had collapsed, he could have turned around. He could have said he tried, but there it was, waiting without apology. Atlas walked first across the clearing, climbed the porch steps, and stood before the door. Ethan followed slowly, each step strangely careful, as though approaching a living thing. He touched the door frame. The wood was cold, damp, real. "All right," he whispered, though he was not sure who he was answering. The key stuck at first, then turned with a small reluctant click. When the door opened, Pine Hollow exhaled. Dust, old ash, cedar rot, rusted metal, and the faint ghost of smoke came into the air. Atlas entered before him, paws quiet on the floorboards. Ethan stepped in after, lowering his pack with a groan that was half pain, half prayer. Outside, sleet tapped the roof. Inside, the dim room held its breath. For the first time in months, Ethan was not passing through. Ethan did not open the cabinet that first night. He told himself it was because the light was bad, because his hands were stiff from the trail, because a locked thing in an abandoned station could wait until morning. But the truth sat heavier than any practical excuse. He was afraid of what hope might do to him if it turned out to be nothing. Pine Hollow's main room was barely larger than a single-car garage, with a blackened wood stove near the center, a table pushed under the front window, 2 cracked chairs, and shelves bowed under old field manuals, rusted lanterns, chipped mugs, and mouse-chewed cardboard boxes labeled in a handwriting that had faded to brown. Rain tapped the roof in a patient rhythm. Somewhere behind the west wall, water dripped into a metal pan someone had left years ago, each drop ringing softly as if the station still kept time. Ethan swept enough dust from the floor to unroll his blanket, fed Atlas, ate cold beans straight from the can, and tried not to look at the green metal cabinet. Atlas looked at it for both of them. The shepherd sat 6 feet away, spine straight, ears forward, his amber eyes steady. Not anxious, not restless, just certain. "You planning to stare it open?" Ethan asked. Atlas blinked once. "That's not an answer." The dog lowered himself to the floor, but did not turn away from the cabinet. Ethan built a small fire after 3 failed attempts, and one quiet curse he apologized for out of habit. The stove smoked at first, then caught, filling the room with a thin warmth that seemed less like comfort than permission. Shadows moved along the walls. The cabinet stood beneath a brittle canvas tarp near the back corner, waist-high, military green, its paint scratched to dull gray along the edges. A brass padlock hung from the latch, dark with age but not rusted through. That bothered Ethan. Everything else in the station had surrendered to weather, dust, or time. The cabinet looked neglected, yes, but not forgotten. Near midnight, Ethan woke to a soft scraping sound. His eyes opened into darkness, broken only by the red pulse of embers inside the stove. At first, he thought it was a branch against the wall. Then he heard it again. Scrape. Pause. Scrape. Atlas stood at the cabinet, one paw touching the lower door. "Atlas." Ethan's voice came out rough. The dog turned his head, met Ethan's eyes, then looked back at the cabinet. No bark, no panic, only insistence. Ethan pushed himself up, his joints protesting, and crossed the cold floor in wool socks. "All right," he whispered. "Show me what you found." He pulled the tarp away. Dust rose in a dry gray breath. Close up, he saw something he had missed earlier. A line cut into the paint near the right edge, not written in marker, but carved with a knife tip. 4 words, small and deliberate. "For the one who stays." Ethan read them once, then again, and felt the room tilt quietly around him. Not for the one who finds it, not for the one who needs it, for the one who stays. Atlas sat beside him, warm shoulder against Ethan's knee. The padlock resisted at first. Ethan fetched his toolbox, knelt on the floor, and worked by flashlight, careful not to damage more than he had to. The old mechanism finally gave with a tired click that sounded too loud in the sleeping station. He removed the lock, set it on the floor, and opened the cabinet. Inside were no jewels, no dramatic treasure, no miracle shining in the dark, only order. 3 canvas bank bags, a stack of hand-drawn maps tied with blue string, a cigar box filled with labeled keys, and on the top shelf, resting beneath a flat stone used as a paperweight, a sealed envelope yellowed with age. Ethan touched nothing for several seconds. The sight of it frightened him more than emptiness would have. Emptiness, he understood, but care, left behind on purpose, was something else entirely. He opened the first canvas bag and found envelopes bundled in tens, each marked with a year and a month. $20 here, $50 there. 100 when the handwriting looked steadier. Savings made slowly, stubbornly, by someone who had believed the future might send a stranger worth helping. Ethan counted only enough to understand $42,000 or close to it. His breath shortened. He sat back on his heels, one hand covering his mouth, not smiling, not crying yet, held between disbelief and a grief he could not name. Atlas nudged the sealed letter with his nose. Ethan laughed once, broken and soft. "You're right," he said. "That part matters most." He lifted the envelope. On the front, in the same careful handwriting, Walter Boone had written, "If you came here with nothing, don't be ashamed. This place has always understood nothing." Ethan closed his eyes. Outside, rain moved through the pines. Inside, beside a dog who had known before he did, a forgotten man held a letter from another forgotten man and felt, for the first time in years, that maybe being found did not always require calling out. Ethan did not read the letter right away. He sat with it in both hands, while the fire settled into a low orange breathing inside the stove, while the rain softened to mist against the windows, while Atlas lowered himself beside him with the patience of a creature who understood that some doors were harder to open than others. The envelope was thin, almost weightless, but Ethan held it as if it might break. Money had a shape he understood. Bills could be counted, folded, spent, lost. But a letter was different. A letter meant someone had imagined him before he arrived. Not him by name, not Ethan Ward, former Army medic, 42 years old, sleeping in a truck with a dog and a map, but someone, a future stranger. A person carrying enough emptiness to walk 11 miles into the mountains and still hope a broken place might have room for him. At last, Ethan slid one finger under the flap and opened it. The paper inside was cream-colored, written in a steady hand that leaned slightly right, the kind of handwriting made by someone who had spent a life labeling maps, weather logs, seed tins, trail markers, and things worth remembering. "Dear stranger," it began. "If you are reading this, then you made it to Pine Hollow, and you stayed long enough to listen. That matters. Most people look at a place like this and see rot, trouble, expense, liability. I never blame them. A hard place asks hard things. But I have known men and women who looked worse than this station on their tired days and still had good beams left inside them. So before you decide what this place is worth, look twice." Ethan stopped there. His throat had tightened so quickly it surprised him. Atlas lifted his head. "I'm fine," Ethan whispered, though neither of them believed it. He kept reading. "My name is Walter Boone. I served this district from 1994 until 2017. Though the last few years nobody knew quite what to call my position. The government had moved on. The road had washed out twice. The budget had thinned down to polite apologies. But people still got caught in weather. Boots still split. Radios still died. Hearts still broke in places too quiet for anyone to hear. So I stayed. Not because I was noble. Don't make that mistake. I stayed because this place gave me a way to be useful without having to explain myself." Ethan looked up at the dark window. For a moment, his own reflection appeared there faintly. Tired face, uneven beard, eyes older than 42, Atlas beside him like a shadow with a soul, he read on. "The money in this cabinet is not a prize. It is not charity either. Charity can make a man feel like he has to lower his head to receive it. This is different. Think of it as tools left by one caretaker for the next. I saved it slowly. $20 from a repaired stove. $50 from guiding a survey crew. $100 when the county finally remembered to pay mileage. Some months nothing. Some months a little more. I did not save it because I knew who would come. I saved it because I believed someone would." Ethan pressed the heel of his hand against one eye, not wiping a tear exactly, just stopping it from becoming a thing he had to answer for. Walter's words did not flatter him. That was why they hurt. They did not call him brave, did not thank him for his service. did not ask him to become inspirational for anyone else's comfort. They simply assumed he was human. Fully human, bruised maybe, poor maybe, late to his own life maybe, but not less. Use the money to make this station safe if you can. Fix the roof first, then the stove, water before comfort, warmth before pride. Keep extra socks, coffee, matches, and a chair near the fire. You will learn that a chair offered without questions can save more dignity than a speech. If someone comes through your door hungry, don't ask them how they got that way before you feed them. If someone is ashamed, do not make them perform gratitude. If someone needs rest, let rest be enough. Ethan lowered the page into his lap. The room had become very still. Even the rain seemed to listen. He thought of every office where he had been asked to summarize his pain in neat lines. Every form that wanted proof of need. Every well-meaning person who had praised his strength when what he needed was permission to be tired. Then he looked at Atlas, whose old eyes had never once required him to explain the shape of his sorrow. The final lines were shorter. If you came here with nothing, do not be ashamed. Nothing is often where honest things begin. You do not have to earn the right to be treated with care. You had that before you arrived. Stay if staying helps you heal. Leave if leaving is what saves you. But whatever you do, remember this. People are not abandoned buildings. Do not condemn them from the outside. Ethan read that last sentence 3 times. Then he folded the letter carefully, with a tenderness he had not used in years, and placed it back on the table. He did not feel rescued. Not exactly. Rescue sounded too sudden, too clean. What he felt was quieter. A handrail in the dark, a cup of water placed beside a bed, a voice from another life saying, "You may stand up when you're ready." Atlas rested his head on Ethan's boot. Ethan bent down and laid his palm between the dog's ears. "We'll fix the roof first," he said. His voice broke on the last word, but it did not embarrass him. Outside, Pine Hollow held its place in the rain. Inside, Walter Boone's letter lay open beneath the lantern light, and Ethan Ward, who had spent years believing he was something the world had misplaced, began to understand that being lost was not the same as being worthless. By morning, the rain had stopped, and Pine Hollow looked less like a ruin than a tired animal deciding whether to trust the hand reaching toward it. Mist hung low between the pines. Water dripped from the roof in uneven beads. The old porch boards shone dark and slick under a pale wash of sun. Ethan stood in the doorway with Walter Boone's letter folded in his shirt pocket and Atlas at his side, both of them watching the clearing as if the world had changed overnight, though nothing outside had moved. $42,000 sat locked again in the green cabinet. The amount still frightened him, not because it was too little, because it was enough to make choices, and choices had become unfamiliar after so many months of only reacting. For a long while, survival had made every decision for him: where to park, what to eat, which gas station had a restroom no one monitored too closely, how long to sit in the library before the staff began to recognize the pattern. Now there was space between need and action, and that space felt almost dangerous. Ethan took out a small notebook from his pack and wrote 3 words at the top of a blank page: roof, stove, water, Walter's order, practical, merciful. He underlined roof first. No man could heal under a ceiling that did not keep weather out. He spent that morning walking the station, making a list: west room leak above the window, chimney needs cleaning, door latch loose, back step rotten, south wall draft, shelves salvageable, table good, 2 chairs repairable. He wrote each item carefully, not as evidence of failure, but as proof that the place was still asking to live. Atlas followed him room to room, sniffing corners, pausing near mouse holes, inspecting the work with the grave expression of a foreman who accepted no excuses. When Ethan pried open the west room window, cold air slid in carrying the smell of pine needles and wet earth. The view surprised him, a narrow meadow dropping toward a creek, silver in the morning light. He imagined the grass in June, the sound of water over stone, boots left drying by the stove, coffee warming in an old blue pot. The image came so gently he almost pushed it away. Instead, he let it stay. 2 days later, Ethan hiked back down to the truck with a short list in his pocket and Atlas moving close beside him. In town, he did not go first to a motel or a diner or a store where a man could spend money pretending he had always had it. He went to the veterinarian. Atlas endured the exam with solemn patience, while Dr. Helen Marsh checked his hips, teeth, heart, and cloudy right eye. "He's in good shape for his age," she said, rubbing the shepherd's neck. A little arthritis. Needs warmer bedding, better joint supplements. No more sleeping in a truck if you can help it. Ethan looked away, swallowing something. We're working on that. Afterward, he bought roofing tar. Stovepipe, 2 wool blankets, water filter, a hand pump, nails, hinges, dry goods, coffee, socks, matches, lantern oil, and a used radio from a pawn shop whose owner knocked $10 off the price when Atlas sat politely by the counter. Ethan paid cash and asked for receipts. He folded each one into the notebook because the money did not feel like his to waste. Before leaving town, he stopped outside the closed Veterans Support Office where Atlas had once lived. The sign had been taken down, but the outline remained on the brick like a memory after a picture frame is removed. Ethan stood there for a long time, then slid an envelope through the mail slot addressed to Nora Bell. Inside was $5,000 and a note written in his careful block letters. For the next veteran who says he does not need help, and the dog who knows better. Back at Pine Hollow, work began slowly. Ethan patched the roof under a hard blue sky while Atlas watched from the porch, occasionally thumping his tail when Ethan muttered at stubborn nails. He cleaned the chimney until black soot covered his sleeves. He replaced the stovepipe, sealed the drafts, fixed the latch, scrubbed the table, repaired both chairs, and set one beside the stove because Walter had told him to. Not for guests, exactly. For whoever arrived with wet boots and a face full of weather. By the end of the first week, Pine Hollow no longer felt abandoned. It felt unfinished, which was a different thing entirely. On the 7th evening, Ethan found an old board in the shed, sanded it smooth, and painted words across it in black letters. Pine Hollow Rest Station. Coffee, water, shelter, no questions asked. He carried it outside at dusk and nailed it beside the door. The sound echoed softly into the trees. Atlas stood below him, head tilted, as if reading. Ethan stepped back and looked at the sign until the letters blurred. He thought of Walter Boone. He thought of Marion Cole. He thought of every person who had ever needed kindness without an interview. Then he opened the door, set the kettle on the stove, and placed a clean pair of socks on the chair by the fire. Not because anyone was coming that night, because someone might. Winter came to Pine Hollow the way truth comes to a quiet man, slowly at first, then all at once. In early November, frost silvered the meadow each morning and vanished by noon, leaving the grass bent and shining. By Thanksgiving, the creek wore a skin of ice along its edges, thin as glass and just as honest. By the first week of December, the trail disappeared beneath snow so clean and deep it made the world look untouched, as if no one had ever needed anything there. Ethan had prepared as well as a man could. The roof held, the stove drew, the shelves were stocked with beans, oats, coffee, rice, canned peaches, dog food, lantern oil, batteries, bandages, wool socks, and enough split wood to make him feel almost proud when he stood beneath the shed roof and counted the rows. Almost. Pride still came carefully to him, like a stray animal that might run if approached too quickly. Atlas loved the snow in short bursts, stepping into it with the solemn curiosity of an old gentleman pretending he was not delighted. His muzzle had grown whiter, and the cold made his hips stiff, but he still walked the perimeter every morning, pausing at the sign beside the door as if inspecting the promise Ethan had nailed there. Coffee, water, shelter. No questions asked, no one had come yet, not a hiker, not a ranger, not a lost driver with bad luck and wet boots. Sometimes Ethan wondered if he had built kindness for ghosts. Then he would hear Walter Boone's words in his head. Someone might. That was reason enough. The storm arrived on a Tuesday evening, though by then the radio had been warning him for 2 days. Heavy snow, high winds, temperatures falling hard after midnight. Ethan brought in extra wood, filled every jug with filtered water, checked the lanterns, checked the stovepipe, checked Atlas's bedding near the fire. The old shepherd watched him move around the room with patient eyes. "I know," Ethan said. "I'm fussing." Atlas gave a low sigh and rested his chin on his paws. By dark, the wind had begun to lean against the station. Snow struck the windows in dry handfuls. The trees beyond the porch vanished, then reappeared in brief gray flashes when the lantern light caught the glass. Ethan sat at the table, writing in the notebook where receipts had given way to weather notes, repair lists, and small observations he would have been embarrassed to call a journal. He wrote, "Storm sounds different when you are not running from it." Then he stopped, pencil hovering. After a long moment he added, "Still scares me." He went to sleep near midnight, with Atlas breathing by the stove and the fire burning low and steady. Some hours later, the dream took him first. Not a full dream, only confusion, smoke-colored and thick. He was trying to find a door, but the walls kept moving away. Someone was pulling at his sleeve. Not hard, not frantic, persistent. Ethan opened his eyes to darkness and the sharp, wrong taste of smoke in his mouth. Atlas was beside him, teeth gently gripping the cuff of his sweatshirt, tugging, releasing, tugging again. The room was hazy. The stove glowed dull red, but smoke leaked from its seams and curled beneath the ceiling like something alive and unwelcome. Ethan sat up too fast, coughed, and for one terrible second his mind emptied. Then Atlas barked once, not loud, not panicked, commanding. Ethan moved. He shoved his feet into boots, wrapped a cloth around his hand, opened the damper, then the door, letting brutal cold sweep into the room. Snow blew across the floor. He killed the fire, dragged the smoking logs into the iron bucket, and stumbled outside to check the chimney. Ice had sealed the cap, packed by wind and frozen hard. His hands shook as he cleared it with a metal rod under a sky with no stars. By the time the smoke thinned and the room breathed again, Ethan was sitting on the porch steps in the storm, coughing into his sleeve, one arm around Atlas's neck. The dog leaned into him, warm beneath the snow gathering on his back. Ethan pressed his face into Atlas's fur and laughed once, a broken sound full of fear and gratitude. "You saved me," he whispered. Atlas only stood there, steady as the mountain, as if saving Ethan was not an event but a habit. In the morning, Pine Hollow was buried to the windowsills, but the station still stood. Ethan made coffee with trembling hands, gave Atlas warm food, and wrote one sentence beneath the storm note. A man can be strong and still need waking. He looked at the chair by the fire, the clean socks folded there, the sign outside half covered in snow. For years he had mistaken needing no one for dignity. Pine Hollow was teaching him otherwise. Dignity was not standing alone in the cold. Sometimes dignity was letting a dog pull you back from the dark, opening the door, clearing the smoke, and living long enough to keep the fire ready for someone else. By the time spring returned to Pine Hollow, the snow did not leave so much as surrender. It pulled back from the porch in ragged white shelves, slipped from the meadow in silver threads, and gathered itself into the creek until the water ran loud enough to be heard through the walls at night. The first green shoots came up near the woodpile, small and stubborn, as if the earth had been keeping a secret under all that cold. Ethan noticed them one morning while carrying coffee to the porch, Atlas moving slowly beside him, his old hips stiff, but his eyes still bright with duty. "Look at that," Ethan said. Atlas sniffed the shoots, sneezed once, and seemed unimpressed. Ethan smiled. Smiling had become easier at Pine Hollow. Not constant, not careless, but possible. The station had changed in ways a stranger might miss if they were looking for something grand. The roof no longer sagged over the west room. The stovepipe stood clean and straight. A hand pump drew cold water from the repaired line. The windows had been resealed. The table had been sanded smooth. The two chairs near the fire no longer wobbled. On the shelf by the door sat dry socks, matches, coffee, trail crackers, bandages, a flashlight, and a little notebook with a pencil tied to it by string. The sign outside had weathered its first winter and still held its promise. Coffee, water, shelter. No questions asked. The first person came in April, a surveyor with soaked boots and a dead radio, embarrassed by how grateful he was for hot coffee. Ethan did not make him explain. The second was a long-distance hiker caught in cold rain, quiet and shivering, eyes lowered as if needing help were a private failure. Ethan gave him soup, a towel, and the chair by the stove. The man slept for 40 minutes, then wrote in the notebook before leaving, "I forgot what it felt like to be welcomed without proving I deserved it." After that, others came now and then. A forest technician with a twisted ankle from a bad step. 2 college geology students who had misread the weather and apologized too many times until Ethan finally said, "Weather doesn't care how smart you are." An older woman hiking alone on the anniversary of her husband's passing, who sat on the porch with Atlas's head in her lap and said almost nothing, which Ethan understood as a kind of trust. Each person left a line in the notebook. "Thank you for the coffee. The socks saved me. Beautiful place. Kind man. Good dog." Ethan never knew what to do with kind man, so he let Atlas take credit for that one. By late summer, Marion Cole hiked in with a walking stick, a small pack and a look of satisfaction she tried badly to hide. She stood in the doorway, taking in the repaired room, the clean stove, the labeled shelves, the maps on the wall, the chair by the fire. Walter would have liked this, she said. Ethan looked away toward the window. The meadow was gold in the afternoon light. I hope so. Marian walked to the green metal cabinet, now unlocked but respected, and rested her hand on its top. You stayed. Ethan thought about the sentence carved into the metal, for the one who stays. He thought staying would mean proving he was tough enough for the mountain. Instead, it had meant learning softness without shame. It had meant accepting that a man could be useful without disappearing into usefulness. It had meant letting Atlas grow old beside the fire and not measuring every day by what had been lost. That evening, after Marian left, Ethan took Walter Boone's letter from the cabinet and read it again beneath the lantern light. Atlas slept nearby, paws twitching faintly, perhaps chasing some younger version of himself through a field only dogs remember. Ethan turned the letter over. There was blank space at the bottom, beneath Walter's final line, "People are not abandoned buildings. Do not condemn them from the outside." Ethan held the pencil for a long time. Then he wrote carefully, slowly, in letters that looked steadier than the name he had signed on the deed months earlier. "And for anyone who needs a place to be treated like they matter." He dated it, folded the letter, put it back in the envelope. Outside, the wind moved through the pines, not lonely now, just old. Ethan stepped onto the porch. The sky above Hollow Creek Wilderness was crowded with stars. So clear and near they seemed less like distant fire than small openings in the dark. Atlas came to stand beside him, leaning his weight against Ethan's leg, the way he had done at the county office, at the trailhead before the cabinet. Through the storm, through every silence, Ethan had survived. Ethan looked at the sign, the meadow, the trail fading into trees, the station behind him glowing with lamplight. For years he had thought home was something other people returned to. A lit kitchen, a familiar voice, a key that fit a door without question. Now he understood it differently. Home was a place where your presence did not need defending. Home was a fire kept ready, a bowl of water by the door, a dog breathing in his sleep, a chair waiting for someone whose worst day had not yet learned how to ask for mercy. Ethan went back inside, opened the notebook and wrote one final line for the night. Not for visitors, not for Walter, maybe not even for himself alone. I am home. Then he set down the pencil, banked the fire, and listened as Pine Hollow, no longer forgotten, settled around him like a promise kept. If this story touched you, please like, subscribe, and tell me which moment stayed with you the longest. And where are you watching from today? Let me know in the comments.